Hi there. Happy Wednesday. This is Bonnie Violet, a queer chaplain, and you found yourself at Faith Leaders 2020. My guest today is Juan Pablo. I'll be bringing him on in a second. But for folks that are new or maybe haven't been here before, I'm just taking some time to speak with some faith leaders that I've looked up to who have impacted my faith in some way, and just trying to create a space in which you can kind of get to meet them, hear about their story, and all that fun stuff. I don't like to go too much into all this like blah, blah, blah stuff. I like to just get in there. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up Juan Pablo, and then we're going to get going.
Hi.
Hey, how's it going?
Good.
Good. I'm so polished, right? And so
Hey, I love that intro. Who's doing the singing there?
yeah, so actually that's my ex-lover, Steven. He actually passed away a few years ago, and
Wow.
it's his song. He wrote it, he sang it, and he also created the visuals. And so his mother allowed me to use his work. So a lot of his work is in a lot of what I do, like in the background or that sort of thing. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
It's a beautiful way to honor someone's life.
Yeah, he was such a beautiful, beautiful creature, but very tortured on this earth. But I'm sure he's at peace now.
Yeah. Huh.
Yes. So, how are you?
I am good. I am in finals week, kind of in school. So there are moments where I don't know what day it is and what time it is. But other than that, it's all good.
I hear you. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about you. I always like to get started with a little bit of childhood stuff. So do you want to tell us a little bit about what it was like as a young person, maybe where you grew up, and maybe any thoughts on religion or spirituality at that time?
Sure. I grew up, born and raised in Chicago. My dad moved here from Mexico, and my mom moved here from Puerto Rico. And so if you're from Chicago, Lakeview used to be a Puerto Rican neighborhood. Oh. And where Wrigley Field is, it was, so they lived blocks away from there. And through gentrification and displacement, my family has pretty much been on the same journey as other Latinx people throughout Chicago, especially Puerto Ricans. So when I was in seventh grade, so maybe I was 12 years old, we moved to Humboldt Park, which was a totally different feel and neighborhood. I did not go to school in the neighborhood. My parents still let me stay where I was. So I went to high school in Chicago. We grew up Catholic until I was about 9 years old. I'm the oldest of four.
Okay.
So at 9 years old, I just remember we started going to church on Saturdays instead of Sundays, and really involved in church, and went to like youth night on Friday nights. We changed the way we ate. We didn't eat pork anymore. And so slowly I understood it was Seventh-day Adventist. So for most of my high school age, pretty much until about 20 years old, I was part of the Seventh-day Adventist denomination.
And how was your experience with that?
I think for me, it was great. I learned, I think from that, I learned to be disciplined in learning about things, Bible stories. And the only thing I remember, though, from growing up with that is always thinking about the end times and that we were going to be persecuted. And that was one of the major things I took out. And I wonder if young people think about that now that are Seventh-day Adventists, that all they're thinking about is God coming and persecution. But for the most part, I love the community I had, friends. The church was in Logan Square in Chicago, and so I didn't participate in things like school dances. really many sports things. Everything we did was at the church. We didn't do anything outside of the church. And so that was my, I think looking back, I think it was good. So I was a church kid.
Mm-hmm. So you enjoyed it.
Yeah. I enjoyed it.
Yeah. And so you said until 20, what happened at 20?
The church I was going to left the denomination and split away from it to become like a charismatic, non-denominational church. And so I moved along with them.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I was there for many years after that. So pretty much the same people from when I was 12 till my mid-20s, 27, were the same group of people that I knew.
So going back to church on Sundays and.
Yeah. So that was the first thing they did was go to church on Sunday. Once they left the denomination, go back to church, go to church on Sundays, and eating pork. So I remember not having had pork chops and shrimp. I'm like, oh my gosh, I had never had a crab leg.
Oh, wow.
Till my 20s.
Mm-hmm.
And so those were the things that changed. And also the way that we studied the Bible changed in some ways too. But I still stuck with it, even though my siblings may have, they left the church for different reasons, or, to go to other churches or just tired of the church and hurt by the church. I stayed. Even if I was hurt by the church, I still stayed for some reason.
Had you been hurt?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely hurt. I remember the first time that I was questioning church people was when my mom brought a group of African drummers, and they were teaching on drumming, how they use that for worship. Mm-hmm. And in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, you didn't have instruments. It was like a piano or a guitar or flute, but I'd never seen drums in the church. And we kind of were looking, she was teaching the youth on like Afro-Caribbean roots that we had. Mm-hmm. And I was next door at someone's house, and they were talking really badly about my mom, and they didn't know she was my mom. And but then I'm like, saw how they treated her when they were in front of her, but how they treated her when she wasn't around, and how they spoke about her. I still remember like it was yesterday.
Oh, wow.
Like that really made an impact on me.
And that was more about church people, not necessarily like church itself, or
right. That was more about church people. That I'm like, I think I saw humanity, that they're just regular folks, not holy.
Right.
For better. I don't have another term that I would have had when I was 15, but I saw them as flawed. And if they were flawed about that, then perhaps they were flawed about other things. Right. And so that's always been in the back of my mind. And so when the church would talk about LGBTQ folks, in the back of my mind, I would always be like, you might be wrong about that. So,
yeah. Very, I heard a lot of people kind of talk, like just our binary thinking, like all or nothing. I was talking with my aunt, and she's like, yeah, when I first was a Christian, it was very much like you have all these list of things that you can do, right? And if you do one thing that you can't, that you're not supposed to, it like, I don't know, somehow you're not a Christian or something, which is wild. But I know that was a lot of my challenge.
Yeah. When you have, as you saw when I described my experience, I just gave you a list of things I couldn't do. Mm-hmm. So to come to church with a list of don't do, the list of what you can do seems to be very small.
Right.
And so you're stuck in this small closet, if you will.
Yeah. And so you stayed around through age 27.
Mm-hmm.
And then I guess you could share what happened then to change that, or what? Yeah. What changed, I guess?
I had, now, and I'll get into it later because I was married at the time. And I had gone through kind of this conversion therapy, but more like spiritual warfare type of therapy that was very interesting. But I was always looking for ways to heal me of homosexuality. And so I would try anything. And so at this point, I met this wonderful woman that would come to our church and speak and was teaching us about spiritual warfare. And that was very new to the church.
Mm-hmm.
And in one of those, I went to kind of a cleansing, or I'm trying to explain it in ways that some people would understand, but it's a session where you kind of go through a list of things that you've done, or that and homosexuality, same-sex attraction was one of them.
Like confession.
Yeah. So it was a checklist of things that you're struggling with, and that was on the list. And the same list as bestiality. So it was just a long list of things. And then they would attribute evil spirit to each one of those things, and a name to each one of those things. So there would be a spirit of mammon, or whatever it is. And at the end of that week, they would have exorcism, if you will, where they would try to exorcise those demons out of you. And so I went through that. But I loved the woman. She was like a short, big woman from Texas with big hair. And I don't know why, but she and I like started having a really good relationship. And I would travel with her sometimes as she went to other churches, and I wouldn't teach her anything. I'd just be with her, and I wanted to learn more. And one day she was going to come back to the church, and she's like, "Oh, I'll stay at Juan Pablo's house." And the pastor's like, "No, I think I want you to stay here." And she's like, "No, I want to stay with him." And for some reason, they took that as that I was causing division at the church.
Oh, wow.
So we had it's a weird thing. But my wife and daughter at the time, just that we were asked to leave. So we were kicked out for that. Yeah. So,
how was it when you were going through that process of getting the demons prayed for, that sort of thing? What was that experience like for you at that time? Was it a good experience? Was it, where was your head?
I was trying to find an answer for something that I had in back then that I was struggling with, that people were telling me was a sin and that I was going to go to hell. But I knew I didn't want to go to hell. Who wants to go there? But not only that I felt a calling from God to do something beyond just have a job, that I really felt a calling to ministry back then. And so for some reason, I thought that I was being kind of pointed out by the devil or by the enemy, right, to give me more things on top of me to struggle with, to take me away from the desire for ministry or to serve God. And so if you think about, like, when you see someone and you're attracted to them, and in your mind you start thinking about having a boyfriend or whatever it is, it does feel like something has swept over you, right? To me, it
Yeah.
did. Like this emotions and your heart beats a different way. To me, it did feel, the way they explained it, it did feel like a spiritual experience, which
Yeah,
I now
definitely.
think of something, like there's a spiritual experience. Someone, your body does something. And so it did make sense. And I really believed that would work. And so I really paid attention, and I really was trying, even though at that point my dad was like, that just does not seem right, but I didn't listen to him.
Right. Yeah. Well, and if you're so earnestly just trying to do right by God, you're kind of open to the idea that I feel like there's a lot of times too where when you're like on a right path, there's this idea that you're going to come under attack, right?
Yes.
And so, which I think it has legitimacy to it. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I feel like I've been experiencing that a little bit myself lately. But again, it's just kind of like how you frame it, and kind of like, yeah, it's spiritual. The feelings that you get when you see somebody that's sexy, right? It's totally spiritual. Is it demonic? Is it evil?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think so. Like not in my experience.
Yeah. But when things get stacked against you and that's all so you're brought up. I never knew someone that was openly gay growing up. To this day, really didn't have any family members that came out or that I thought were gay. So I didn't have anyone to normalize it, I guess. And so it was always seen as something bad.
Gotcha.
By my culture, by my family, or not even talked about, not even bad. It's just whenever you did hear something, it was always a negative connotation to it. And so the first time when I was 13, I was going to graduate from 8th grade. And we had a friend from church they were going to move away, but their son was in high school. And so there was only a couple of months left for graduation, and my parents took him in, and he looked like Prince. He had this was 1983.
Okay.
1983, had the curly hair, long and thin, and
super queer, huh?
Super queer.
Right.
And I was obsessed with him. I just wanted to hang, and I'm 13, he's 17. Anything that he was doing, I just wanted to be there. And at one point I'm like, we're both graduating. I'm graduating 8th grade. He was graduating high school. And he offered for me to wear his shoes for my graduation. And they were beautiful. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to wear his shoes. My dad did not. My dad just got kind of freaked out, kind of by the friendship, because this was the first time I had ever been close to anyone that was, I'm not going to use the word feminine or not, but that was different from what was modeled to me about masculinity in Puerto Rican culture. So it was the first time that I felt someone that was free, and that I felt free in front of. Like I felt like this release of being able to be myself, but I didn't know what that meant.
Yeah.
So because I was 13 and I had never heard or seen anything or seen anyone like him. But he graduated and he left the house, and so that was pretty much the only experience I had with anyone that was part of the LGBTQ community. And then in high school,
right. But isn't it amazing how like queer folk have this ability to create space for people to feel comfortable in, like to like they can bring stuff into a space that they normally don't feel like they can?
Yeah, and that's why I think that we're magic.
Totally, right?
I don't know if there's another word, but that that we're created with this ability to everyone around us feel a certain way. I think that is special.
Right.
And so now I see myself as being created in the image of God, which is loving and inviting and non-judgmental. Yeah.
Prince.
Yes, you could be Prince, you could be Madonna, whoever you want to be.
Right. And so when did I know that you're a pastor now? When did you start that journey? Or did you want to share something before that, I guess?
Yeah, well,
So I feel like it's a big jump.
yeah, it's a big jump. Well, how I got to that. So I came out when I was 17 to my parents. And I remember the conversation with my mom, and she didn't, at that point was like, oh my goodness. I try to put myself in her shoes, and she did what she knew to do at the moment. And what she knew from church and religion and all these. So she was like, no one in our family is gay. And I'm like, yeah. And also that the belief that homosexuals would go to hell.
Right.
So that's the first time I kind of heard that. I had never heard that before. And so I remember I just had gone through so much trauma over that year. I found out that on a fluke that I was not Mexican, that my dad was not my biological dad. And so I'm the oldest, and that shook me a lot. Like I felt like my identity, I questioned my identity. And then I got my last year in high school, I was raped by two strangers. And so all of these things coming together, and then me feeling like I'm different than other people. And so all of these things happened. I had that conversation with my mom, and the trauma and trying to deal with all of that, I ran away from home. I started using drugs. At that point, my parents had no choice. Like, what were they going to do? Right. We had a household of people, other siblings, cousins that lived, and I was out of control, really. But I think I was trying to deal with all of these things in a certain way, you know? And so my parents sent me to Mexico, and I went there, and I had a great time there. But I used to go to a 12-step program. Alcoholics Anonymous is my uncle. And he was the only one in Mexico and my family that knew that I had a problem, and we were able to talk about it, and the drug use that I had. And so he would go with me there. And while I was there, there was a group of Christians that invited me to church. And this was the first time that I had heard that I could change my orientation. And so I said, great, and went through, kind of a week-long process of learning things. And at the end of it, they put together these kind of experiences that I've had, and why those experiences made me gay.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so I came back to Chicago, and then I got married and went through that whole spiritual warfare thing, because I felt it coming back on. I felt like it was getting stronger. And so I did that, and then I tried again. And my kid's mom, my ex-wife, we would have good conversations around it, because I really did think that it was something that I could overcome. And so we had good conversations around that. And the church always taught that it was wrong. So I tried to find other ways to deal with that. And so I did that, went again to another kind of conversion therapy through Exodus International. and none of them were working. None of them were working. I ended up getting divorced and just alone, and didn't have family, didn't have church, anyone that I could really be myself around or have conversations around it, because inside I knew how I was feeling, but I kept also inside was like, but I'm going to go to hell for this.
Right.
And I didn't want to go to hell. And so who does,
Right.
So it wasn't until, a few years ago that things kind of changed. And I walked into a church that had queer people in it. And I'd never seen queer people in a church as themselves, open, serving, and a worship team, or even a pastor. And so it was, that changed me, that changed me. I remember having coffee with Pastor Hannah from Urban Village, which is where I started going. And she took me out for coffee, and she said, I'm trying to tell her, I'm like, I've never seen gay people. Like, I just kept talking and rattling off, like, I want to know more. And finally she's like, first of all, I want to tell you, Juan Pablo, you were created exactly how you are. And that changed me. That's what changed my, kind of how I thought about myself and how I thought about God.
Yeah.
So once that happened, I'm like, I must tell everyone.
Right.
I said, I have to tell everyone. And then Hurricane Maria happened. My grandmother died during that storm, and my dad had a stroke, and I went to Puerto Rico. And while I was there, it was horrible. But I did, through all that, got to meet the few gays that were in town. I met, and we would have conversations, and I would ask them about their religion, or we would talk about spiritual matters. And one after the other said, there are no churches here that will accept us.
Oh, wow.
And then I'm like, this has to change. So I left that experience and quit my job and started seminary.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And till I got, so it's been about 4 years since that experience. It's been 3 years since the storm in Puerto Rico, Hurricane Maria. And so, so now I'm pastoring and looking at planting a church that's specific for people, maybe in our language or our voices, and hopefully that'll happen.
Yeah. So how is I know you said it's different. So how do you see your being gay or being queer, however way you identify? How does that align with your understanding of God and all that, I guess?
Yeah. Now I the way I see myself is fully created in the image of God. And that image has changed. So it's not that I have changed, but the image of God has changed for me. And God is no longer this God that has these rules, because it's always been the don't. And God now has become someone that is loving, someone that is always for the underdog, and prefers the underdog, prefers the poor, prefers people that have been excluded. And the way I see Jesus has also changed. So the way I see God and Jesus and the Holy Spirit, all three of those have changed. And so I myself have not changed, because I've always felt like I've been the same. Right. But how I understand God in relation to who I am has changed.
Right. And that has had an impact, though, on you as well, right?
Oh, yeah. Because now I mean, for decades, almost 30 years, have always hidden that part of me from people, from my family, from friends, from co-workers, and now to be able to walk as my authentic self is what has empowered me to be really bold in who I am. So I can be bold and just be who I am, and I think that has freed me from this knots that I always had inside of me.
Yeah, definitely. I had a great question. Went out of my head. Yeah. So you're working at starting a church now, and basically the idea was around kind of creating church that you would have liked to be in or found earlier.
Yeah, or a church that represent. I never had anyone to look towards. Definitely not a pastor. But besides that person, when I was 13 years old, I really didn't see other people that kind of maybe looked like me or had the same experience of growing up in a Puerto Rican culture, Mexican culture, and so. So the hope is that we would have those types of representation, and you would see a worship leader, a trans Latinx worship leader, or other people that you can identify with.
Exactly. I mean, it's so important. It's one of the things that I've been noticing too. It's like with the Bible too. It's like we're all in there. We're all in there, and it's like, but the way that the narratives have been told to us, or like you said, like your point of view, it's like, okay, I know about a eunuch. Oh wait, is a eunuch a trans person? Oh, are they Ethiopian? Are they a Black trans person? Oh, and they were important to what? It's like, and it's like, but I never had that sort of like way to see things, and now I can see myself as like a queer person, trans person in the Bible in a time when I don't know that I would have ever seen it before,
Yeah, or different stories. There was I was reading the story where Jesus' mom and his brother came, and he was with a group of people, and they said, "Your mom and your brother outside," and he says, "My mother, my brother are the ones that do the will of my Father," and I saw myself in that, and other people that have come out. And so, if you think about Jesus getting baptized and his coming out into ministry and going through the wilderness, we all go through that wilderness when we come out and we feel rejected, and we're hungry and thirsty, and then some of us have to find a chosen family. We have to find families. Because our family has rejected us. And so I can find myself in a lot of the stories. I thank God that my family has not rejected me. But there are many that have. And so I could read myself into a queer interpretation on so many stories now.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like if Jesus was critical of anyone, he was critical of the privileged, right? Of the
majority. Who are the majority of them? If the majority are the ones that are saying that that homosexuals are going to go to hell, then who would, I'm always like, look for the underdog in the story, and that is who Jesus is going to go to. And so if I'm the underdog, I now see myself as the preferred.
The chosen, right?
The chosen.
If the question that I did come to mind now was, I was curious, it seems like throughout all your journey, there was maybe a relationship with God. Did you ever not have a connection with God?
Nope, always have. Through all of it. Always, it was kind of warped and kind of twisted. Because of the way I saw God as a God that punishes, especially during the AIDS pandemic in the 80s, and seeing that as, from what I was told, that it was a punishment to gay men specifically. So through it all, I always had what I thought was a dialogue with God, but always wanting to, I think we had talked about this before, understanding more. I have to understand this. And so, we have one of my cousins, Animo, said something in Spanish and a comment there. Hola, Norma. My family from Mexico is watching.
Oh, nice.
So through it all, I've always had, I never stopped going to church. I always served. And I put this part of myself to the side. Kind of, it reminds me now, like we're all kind of self-isolating because we're all waiting for the vaccine.
Right.
And we're like, now that the vaccine is like here, we see and we have hope that one day we're going to get this vaccine. And that's how I kind of led my life. Like one day I'm going to have an answer for this.
Yeah. I remember when I first left church, that was kind of my thinking, because I think that's the power of church and that, but like because I left church because I was gay and diagnosed with HIV. And like, I remember just feeling like, okay, I'm going to put God on this shelf over here, and God's got me. He understands why I am the way I am, and I just got to do. But it was still kind of like God can be okay with me because he knows, like, he can understand why I'm fucked up, which is not the case. I'm not fucked up in those ways, right? But it's so important how it seemed like, though, the thing that you continued to do was seek, and just how important it is that the people around us have on our I don't know, it's so interesting to me, because I have that problem too, where it's like, I know shit, I know I have a connection with God, I know all these sorts of things, and then I can get myself in a setting and I'm like, oh wait, but they're telling me that that's not right, or that's not quite the way, or and it can be really kind of confusing.
I think that if you see God as he has to love me versus he chooses to love me, he loves me. And so but and I think that giving people options so that I shouldn't have had to go through all of that spiritual trauma for 30 years. I shouldn't have had to, but there were no choices. So if growing up in Humboldt Park, I would have never thought of going to a Methodist church. Or to another. I didn't know that there were denominations that were affirming. And I didn't know there were churches that were affirming until I walked into one. And then it's like, a whole world opened up, and like scales fell from my eyes, to use a biblical term. I saw a whole new way to share the gospel and what the gospel really is, and what the good news is.
Definitely.
And the good news is that we're here. We're here just like we are.
Exactly. And we're a gift. I mean, we're a gift to the world.
Definitely.
Like, could you, I don't know. It's like, I love who I am, and I know that I'm continued to be created by God. I'm continuing to be created in God's image, and it's cool to be in a part of my life where I feel like I am being a co-creator with God, that like I'm a part of the process, that I'm not just like going along because I don't know, like there was just a time when I felt like I was like damaged, or like I was, I don't know. I was damaged by things that happened to my life, like these horrible things that happened, like I was raped, so I thought that made me gay, or I wasn't really this, or these sexual behaviors was because of this situation and all that. And it's like, like all that.
I can't imagine like even gender, to think about that. That you feel like you're not a full creation, that along the way things messed you up, changed your DNA.
Right. Well, and those things don't necessarily have any, you don't, like, for me, you don't want to be a product of what hurt you, right? Like you don't want to be a victim of a circumstance. You want to be able to be like, okay, this thing happened to me, and how do I move forward, and how does it inform me? Because I feel like sometimes I've had that battle of thinking like, oh no, this is just because that thing happened to you. And it's like, no, that thing actually, sometimes those things happen to you because you are, not because you are, but because you are. It makes you more vulnerable to being in some really situations that can lead to traumas, you know?
Yeah. And it speaks about the trauma that's perpetrated on our community, you know, and all of the hardship that people in the LGBTQ community have to put up with at all ages. Hi, Adi. And so, so I just find that just something that we're learning and I'm always learning. One of the ways that I learned, I thought the quickest was I hadn't been part of the LGBTQ community. So, and here I was 47 years old and it was like I was a teenager.
Right.
And so, I started going to the clubs and staying out all night. I love dancing. And because I was part of a tradition that didn't allow dancing really. I'm like, oh, I'm going to dance. And I danced I was going out Thursday, Friday, Saturday. It was like always going out. Yeah. And then I landed on, I took a dance class in Humboldt Park and I wanted to learn how to dance salsa. And it actually was in Logan Square. And so when I told the instructor I want to learn how to dance the woman's part of the dance. I want to be led. Right. And so it was my first experience being led dancing. And he's like, oh, you picked that up pretty quickly. Do you want to learn country line dancing? I'm like, sure. And so I went to Charlie's country western bar here in Chicago. And took a dance lesson there, and I loved it. And I joined a country dance team.
Oh, nice!
That would be like the thing I would never have thought I would do. And the things I learned so much about myself and so much about our community and how loving we are from people that I don't know if they were Christian or not. It took me outside of the church and put me in a whole new environment. And I learned more. We had one of the members was a trans man. And so just forming relationships with people from all over the spectrum.
Yeah.
Very butch men, very femme men, like they had it all there. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, wow. I'm like, this was so new. And then I learned I can just be myself. I don't have to fit in any of those categories that I saw, but I could be who I am. And that's now a new category. And we all have our own categories.
Yeah. Well, how has it been? How has it been then navigating? Because I think the other end, a lot of times as queer folks, we're thought to be godless or without spiritual. Many of us have a lot of trauma. So how is it for you socially being in those gay communities as a Christian or as a pastor even? Like, how is that for you navigating that?
I think for me, what has changed in me is that I'm no longer up here and non-Christians are here, and that my whole job is to have them receive Jesus in their heart. And now it's like you're created by God, I'm created by God, and I can learn from them. Especially like something as small as swearing and using bad words, which I'd never have.
Right.
And now I don't flinch, because I don't see that as a sin or as something that makes you less than.
If you don't give it that power, it doesn't have that for you.
Yeah. And so being in in those environments or with those friends, and to be able to call them friends has been a big change. And so a friend is, it's just this reciprocal relationship. And so Christian or not Christian, I see that they all have the divine that they look like. And so, yeah.
There's so much that we can learn from being in different places with different people, rather than kind of surrounding ourselves by the same thoughts, the same beliefs, the same situations. It's just such I know, I think we were talking about a little bit before the show, but like I used to always seek for sameness, the way that I stayed in a group of people, even when I got into recovery, they're like, connect where you're the same, let go of what you're not. And I've gotten to a point in my life where it's like, no, we're different. And that's like freaking rad, and like, and to create space in which we can be different and we can respect one another's differences can just allow us to grow. Yeah.
I would never thought I'd be sitting here next to someone, with earrings and, different than me, and loving you exactly how you are. Right. And how much who you are brings life into me, I think is something that I have never experienced, allowing you to impact my life in exactly how you were.
That's magic. Thank you for sharing that with me.
You're magic.
We are.
I told you that before.
Well, and as you know, like I have a podcast with my aunt as well, and she's a conservative Christian, and I do the show with her in drag. And it's just that whole idea that like she's definitely challenging herself to like, I want to be a part of a different community. Like I want to be exposed to different ways of thinking and different words. And I want them to be exposed to me too, because I want them to know that as a conservative Christian, I love you and I don't hate you. And I don't think all these sorts of things. There might've been a time I did, and there's a lot of things that I might just don't know. And so I'm afraid or whatever, but like, I'm not that person, Like I'm not, I don't know. It's just the more we can kind of like be with people, I just think the more, I don't know.
It's we have a long way to go. We've come a long way, but we have a long way to go, and to move people beyond the just loving me but hating a part of me is the part that we have to get past, because that part of me that you hate is the part of me that God loves and God created, exactly like that. So hating a part of me and calling that the sin is hating something that God created.
Right. Well, and how you can't, when you hate something, that's more about you than it is about the thing you hate, really. Do you know what I mean? Like, it shouldn't really bother you if it doesn't impact you. Why should you care?
Yeah. But it's the one thing that does bother.
Oh yeah. But I think that's because it brings up something in people, whatever it is, whether or not they're able to, I guess, explore that a little.
Yeah. Yeah. And so all of that, being in the country dance team, being at church, a church that affirms me and others, and whose stories are valuable to the community as a whole, has really impacted me more so than reading any of the Bible that, and any of the passages that people use as proof against me or against anyone in the community. And I don't pay attention to those anymore. I know them and I could have a discussion around them. They're not that many verses. I can have a conversation about that, but I just choose not to, because it doesn't, those verses don't define me anymore. And I don't need to, I'm not here to argue with you. And I'm not here for you,
Right.
I'm here for someone else. So,
right. Well, I feel like the more I dig into seeking God or dig into that sort of stuff, it mostly just, it verifies and confirms everything else that's going on in the world. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't, I don't have to change the Bible, if you will. Like, I don't have to change my belief or my relationship to God to suit what's going on out here. Do you know what I mean? Like, it is already like, it's already aligned. Like, it's not, I don't know. We just got to go ahead.
Yeah. And I gave that a lot of power for over 30 years, and I'm not going to give it power anymore. It's powerless now. And now we have people like you that are having conversations with conservative aunts.
Right? We went 20 years without talking first, but
decades.
Yeah, it's off. It's sad, but it's what happened.
Yeah. Or my family that is so loving and we've all come a long way in how we see the LGBTQ community.
Right.
And it's this special kind of bond now of seeing the suffering that I had to go through, and you had to go through, and other people had to go through.
Right.
So
a lot of unnecessary suffering, though.
Yeah.
But the cool thing is that we're seeing that people coming after us are at least having a little less suffering than what we got to endure.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, that gives me so much hope to see young adults today in speaking their own truth, and their experience is their own, and paving the way in new ways.
Indeed.
And we have a lot to learn. We have a lot to learn from young people.
That we do. So we're coming up at the end of our time. Is there anything that you would like to share about, or like either with the new church that you're planting, or just
No, I'm excited to be doing this work and figuring out ways to have conversations with people, and maybe other people that have been through the same thing that I have, or even family members where maybe their son, their daughter has come out and don't know how to deal with that. And dealing with it is not kicking them out and rejecting them, but wanting to find other ways or answers. I'm hoping that I could, God would be able to use me in that sense for that.
Yeah, God will. I know it. God already has. Thanks so much for joining me today. I'm excited to be continuing working with you on our Dragon Spirituality series.
Yeah,
that we'll announce all the details for. That'll happen in 2021. And then, so thanks so much for joining us today. For folks who are maybe tuning in for the first time, I get together once a week, and I'm meeting with faith leaders through the end of 2020, just to see what's up. And so next week, our pastor is actually in the UK in London. And so we will be actually meeting at 9:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time instead of the 3:33 p.m. So we'll be meeting with Trey Hall, who was one of the founding pastors of Urban Village Church, which is also a place where I learned that I could exist in my fullness and love God too, and play with Jesus a little bit if I wanted to. You know what I mean? Like figure it out.
Figure it out.
Yeah. So
we need spaces like that. So
definitely. I'm excited to hear hear of the church that you get going, and if there's anything I can do along the way, feel free to reach out. And I think I'm going to go ahead and say goodbye. If you want to say goodbye too.
Goodbye. Bendiciones.
All right. And I'm just going to play this little outro, and we will be done.